Drink to today and drown all sorrow. You shall perhaps not do it tomorrow. But while you have it, use your breath. There is no drinking after death. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Martinworld, A Song of Ice and Fire crossover reread. I am your hostess, the Fattest Leech. You can just call me Leech. And I am the crazy one that's read all of George's stories, not just dream songs, and have somewhat developed this crossover analyzation of of the two worlds that I called Martinworld. So today we're going to do a very short but very fun story that George wrote a while ago that to me it kind of seems like it reads like a joke, a long joke or long running joke. This one is called Closing Time. I first came across Closing Time myself in Portraits of His Children. This is the version I am working from. This one has an introduction by Roger Zelazny. If anybody knows me, if anybody knows George, you will understand how extremely important Roger Zelazny is to him personally, also professionally, including Ice and Fire and other stories. So it's my double promote for anything Roger Zelazny, read it. Anyway, so we're going back to Closing Time. We're going back to this long-running joke. This story was published in 1982. George's published timeline does not always match up with his when it was written timeline. Often he will write a story and through revisions or rejections, it will take 4 or 5 years till it actually gets to print. However, this one was printed around other stories George had going on, such as Night Flyers, which I have transcribed on my reread page. One Wing with Lisa Tuttle, which is very interesting. These two he was working on about the same time because Closing Time is one of George's early concepts of green seeing. And we'll get to that. You'll see why. So having Night Flyers and One Wing with Lisa Tuttle, especially having those other sci-fi fantasy stories that also have developing green seeing talents in them. This is very important for what we see later in Song of Ice and Fire. George is also working on Guardians from his Tough Voyaging series. Remembering Melody, which I have transcribed, and there was a television episode of Remembering Melody. I have all the links on my Remembering Melody page on my blog if you want to take a look at that. In the Lost Lands, which I've discussed, and I think there's still, at the time of this recording, it looks like the story in the Lost Lands is going to make a new appearance in movie form, which I am extremely ecstatic about. And we'll have to cover that story pretty soon. And then The Monkey Treatment, which is another very personal story of George's. That one has to do more with how he perceives himself personally and physically, not so much professionally as he does in Portraits of His Children. That story, Portraits of His Children, is more of a professional critique of himself. The Monkey Treatment is more of a physical critique of himself. Now, usually when I do any of these rereads, I try to get as much background information on characters, character names, locations and location name, just any origin information. There's not much online that I can find about this story, Closing Time. But like I said, this is a short, fun one. It's maybe 10. Like if you were to print this out, maybe 10 8x10 pages long, or I'm sorry, 8.5 by 11 regular print paper length long. So if you're looking for something that's quick, I have this story transcribed with all of the notes plus some that I'm going to talk about today on in my reread section. So yeah, he doesn't talk about this question a lot, and I would love to one day transcribe the foreword that Roger Zelazny wrote in this compilation here. I would love to what he wrote, because it's titled A Sketch of Their Father. So when I make little jokes, little winks, little nods that this is George's world, we're only living in it. Yep. This is his contemporaries all the same thing, and that's fair for any author, actually. So a few repeating themes that we're going to see in this story that George reused again in A Song of Ice and Fire, and a common theme across a lot of sci-fi and fantasy anyway. We're just taking a delve into how George in particular is dealing with it. But it's the theme of be careful what you wish for, you might just get it. And when you get it, it's never how you expected it to be. So this is prophecy. This is A Song of Ice and Fire prophecy in a nutshell. There and some other themes are, personal choice. We are the result. Our ending song, our final song, is the result of the choices we have made along the way. And then another theme is you have power. So you have something that has power. How do you handle it? And Armageddon. Not only does George have a story literally called Armageddon Rag, which is another way to say A Song of Ice and Fire, which is essentially a big death song. We see that in here. So this is why does George have these recurring themes across all of his works? That's one of the questions that I want you to think about along the way, and to come back with comments, and we'll chat about it and figure it out. And which as we start with smaller stories like this, it builds and builds and builds, and you'll see the same thing along the way. And it's what is George telling us? What is George showing us in his magnum opus, A Song of Ice and Fire? What does that have to do with anything? And green seeing. I have a page called Green Seeing is Enlightenment, or Means Enlightenment. That if you're somebody who's really into the green seeing, loosely quote, magic arc of A Song of Ice and Fire, I recommend my own page, obviously, but not because I wrote it, but because I have a slew of resources and quotes by George and quotes from other stories of his that I have brought together just to help emphasize and show and share what George is trying to do with green seeing in general. It's not just magic. It's not just some old guy sitting in a tree and watching you. It's actually quite a very common theme across his work. So this story, who are the main characters? We have Hank. He's a bartender. We have Barney Dale. He is the one with marital woes. He's close to Glenn Sykes in some of the meat handler stories. And we have Milton, who he comes in, he's wet and he's angry and he's a giant. He's described as a giant. George loves giants. Giants are in his story not just because of the football Cowboys versus the Giants, but because of past real world history that he draws upon just as a loose building block for his own story universe. And then Milton, he's often called Milt, and he drinks a green drink called a grasshopper. And I'll link it I don't even know how long anymore, several years ago on the Westeros.org forum. I started kind of cheekily. I started a thread about Bran and Pinocchio. And at first I was like, just having fun. And then the more I got into it, the more I realized there could be something here. And yes, George knows all about Italian fables and stories. And I even had a chance to talk to George personally about this, and that's interesting. But for right now, I'm just going to link the information if you want to keep collecting what I'm talking about. So yeah, but Milton drinking a grasshopper, that's similar to Bran drinking the weirwood paste. That's very similar to Josh York in Fever Dream, how he drinks his green herbal elixir that helps him with his talents. This is again a common theme across George work. It's this green drink. Even though Bran's drink is red and white and it's in a wood bowl, it's still a green drink for the green seeing. And no, I don't think it's Jojen paste. I know at this point in time, Jojen paste has a lot of traction because, it's fun to say Jojen paste. And it's fun to talk about. I don't really know that is exactly what George is going for, but we'll see. And then we have Sleazy Pete. Pete means rock. He's also the one that sold this amulet to Milton. What is this amulet? It is a moonstone, and it's not just any moonstone. It's a moonstone that has that seems to be in a circular shape, and it is embedded in silver, and it's embedded, and it has like little, I forget which animals it is, but it has animals engraved all around it. So this is the green seeing moonstone rock. Okay, so let's just drop this really quickly. George has the big thing with, I don't know if he's a secret geologist or wannabe geologist, or sci-fi geologist, maybe something about moon rocks when he was growing up. Something about moon rocks like intrigued him. But he uses stones a lot across, swirl stones, mine stones, etching into like a neural net, kind of like what we see in Night Flyers at the end, just with the mother. And then we have something that's different, which are whisper jewels. And then, of course, in Song of Ice and Fire, the queens in the north wear amber, like Dalla wears amber. And you have, your other red stones, red ruby stones essentially are analogs for blood and fire in the Song of Ice and Fire. So yeah, the whole stone amulet thing, George has been working on for a long time, and I love it. Every time you see something like that coming up, readers of his know that, okay, this is the time that we're supposed to be paying attention. So on with the story. And I'm here just to encourage you to seek this story out and to read it, and let's discuss it. So I'm not going to go line by line. I'm going to just give you a quick run through, and then I'm sure I'll see you later somewhere so we can chat about it. So Closing Time by George R.R. Martin. The way it starts, the world ended on a slow Tuesday night. Is there anybody in the Song of Ice and Fire community that is keeping tracks of the days of the week? If not, there should be. We need a chart for this. So as we get to winter and dream of spring, we can test our theories here. So the world ended on a slow Tuesday night. The rain had been coming down heavily since mid-afternoon, and trade was lousy. Hank was washing some beer steins and listening to Barney Dale relate his marital woes. He has heard all of Barney's marital woes before, but there was nothing else to do. The happy hour crowd had departed early tonight, and Barney was the only customer in the joint. So on a personal, I don't really like to talk about George's personal life. That's his. When I go over the story Meat House Man in the next week or two, that'll probably be the most I will ever talk about or speculate about George's personal life. However, I want to say here, in George's real life, he was having personal relationship woes. So a lot of these stories written around this same time have that element in there, because he is a romantic, and when things go wrong, he holds that close to his heart, which is why you can see why, speaking of the green seeing element in particular, why you can see George gave Bloodraven the backstory of his failed romantic relationships with Sheriff Seastar. Bloodraven's story about that, his backstory that he tells Bran, that was pretty much straight up lifted from the captain in the Stone City, the one that teaches the main character how to fly. So again, we're flying, we have the same character archetypes, almost the exact same dialogue in a lot of cases. So we're here to start reading about this and to put those pieces together, to weave this tapestry. So a lot of George's stories start in the rain. This probably, even if you watch his story Beauty and the Beast, some of the key story elements, plot points happen in the rain. Rains of Castamere, that was repurposed and reused from George's old stories, and he does that. And my front page of my blog has many quotes from George where he says that he reserves the right to reuse his own ideas, and he does. So Hank sighed. It was going to be another one of those nights. "First, close the door, Milt," he called. "The rain's coming in." "Oh," said Milton. Under his temper, he was actually kind of a sweetheart, though you'd never know it to look at him. He stood 6'7" with the fist size of cinder blocks, and twice as hard. "Sorry," he said, a bit abashed. He closed the door and came striding over to the bar, working his glower with every step. He was drenched, and his shoes squished when he walked, but his anger was so palpable you almost expected the moisture to come off boiling as he was steaming. So not only is he a giant, but he has some squisher elements to him too. So surprise squisher. Introductions are always awesome. How much fun is this? And he's also described a lot like Harry Mike Dunn from Fever Dream. And then he comes in, he orders this grasshopper. Also, with the grasshopper, the drink, Littlefinger, who he's trying to pull a fast one. This is important to know, these small details, because they weave together. Peter Baelish, or Littlefinger, he is always chewing on mint. He wants his breath to smell like mint. It's because he's trying to pull a fast one. I mean, yeah, John Aaron had stinky breath, and Peter Baelish, or Petire Baelish, always has sweet minty breath. But where did George originally even conceptualize this idea that we need a sweet breath and associated with somebody that is trying to pull a fast one? It's in his body of work. That's the answer. Sleazy Pete is what this guy's name is. Remember, he's the one that sold the rock, or the amulet, to Milton. And actually, Hank, the bartender, small detail, he's described a lot, when Willie Flambeau from George's werewolf story, The Skin Trade, he walks into a bar. We have a very similar situation here. Then we get to this one key line. It says, "Barney raised his stein and smiled tentatively. Hank took it and drew him another. As he set it down, Barney said, 'Now how do you know just when he's going to be in, Hank? You one of them ESP fellows my missus is always reading about from the Inquirer?' Okay, so here we go, George. It's ding, 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 ding. Not only do we have green seeing elements that are already starting in this story, but he's even driving home the point that it is ESP related. So even if it does, all of the ingredients are there. It's not exactly word for word, but all of the ingredients are there, and you don't even have to like make any crackpot up to fill it in. ESP is also in his George's Thousand Worlds universe. There's something, the Whisper Jewels I was talking about earlier, they are Esper Etch, ESPER, which means, well, it's ESP, but it's a psionic it takes a psionic or telepathic talent to etch them, which is done on a few planets. The best ones come from Avalon. And the the line where he's saying, "You one of them ESP fellows my missus is always reading about from the Inquirer." So if there was I think it's still around. There was, like one of these what would be clickbait now, trash magazines called the Inquirer. I hope I don't get sued for that. Called the Inquirer, that was really big years ago, and their slogan was "Inquiring minds want to know." So again, small details. George does this with other real world elements like Primatine Mist, but we'll get that's a different story. And then we get to the amulet. The amulet had a nice heft to it. Hank examined it more closely. All around the outside rim were little carvings of animals, all kinds of animals. In the center was a milky white stone of some sort. The lines ran in from the animals to the stone. So it's like there's like a radiation, like spokes on a wheel. Interesting, Hank said. What's the crystal in the middle? So we have this wheel. This is a power element. This is a power symbol that we have right now. And then we get on to some details that we see again in George's werewolf story, The Skin Trade, which is also about, stealing skin. It's very Bolton, very, very, very Bolton. It's skin changing, warging, stealing skin. All of these pre Song of Ice and Fire details that went into George developing the Stark and Bolton historic battles across time, which in the current story now, as of A Dance with Dragons, we see it just about to come back on page most dramatically between John and Ramsay, with Theon and Bran in the background, or it's the support, whatever you want to call it. So then Milton gets another grasshopper. He keeps going, and when he's going, he's getting drunk, and as he's getting drunk, he starts to see visions like Bran in the weirwood paste. Watery eyes, Bran's blue eyes, or Sweet Robin's watery eyes are common links to having some sort of green sight. Why Bloodraven is rivers. There's connections to this watery blue eyes and green seeing. The line in here is, Hank looked up from his dishwater. What? He said. Barney Dale was staring too, looking from the amulet to Milton and then down again, blinking his watery blue eyes as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. So they're starting to hear the stories about what this amulet does. This amulet allows them to literally skin change, but their entire body changes. It's not just a mind that goes into, it's not just a mind that goes into a rabbit. They become the rabbit. And so of course we're not going to see that in the Song of Ice and Fire, but you can see how George has reworked that. And then they're sitting around, they're talking, they're at this bar, they're drinking back and forth. And then there's a few lines of how it relates to the moon. It says, if you own that goddamn amulet, then that what good old moon comes poking up, you can change. So Moonblood, essentially what they're talking about, Moonblood. Sansa in the Veil is a type of bird symbolism that's connected to a moon. John at the Wall with the blue flower as a the blue flower and with the chink in the wall. That is, very briefly, for the purposes of this video, very briefly, that is George telling us that is John's moon blood. That is John going through his warg green magic puberty. That is actually a warning to Dany. But like I said, I have a whole other essay and everything that's already posted about that, and we're not going to go into it here. But all of this blue and water and skin changing and moon blooding, it all goes together. Flowering in general. Yeah, that's puberty. In the Targaryen family line, controlling the moon blood has a very similar reason, but with a different outcome. That has to do with their incest. They're trying to control the moon blood. They're trying to control their bloodlines. They're trying to control their mental connection or skin changing abilities that they have with the dragons. So that's it's one of those extreme fire elements, not this middle of the road green item. So then they're going, and they're all talking back and forth about, what do you mean you turned into a rabbit? I thought you wanted to do this. And he was like, yeah, I did. I wanted this, and that's what I wished for, but I got this instead. So again, be careful what you wish for. You might get it, but not how you think. And then we get to this other part in the story. It's kind of interesting because there's a direct Dance with Dragons quote that goes with it. Barney put the disc on the bar between them. Look, he said, there's no rabbit. I thought perhaps these pictures along the rim gave some indication of how it worked, you see. If there was a hawk and then a rabbit, that would make sense, wouldn't it? Then we could see what followed. And no doubt, the next bearer of the amulet would turn into that, whatever it might be. Only there's no rabbit. Here's a bird, he pointed, and there's a wolf and some kind of big cat and all kinds of other predators, but there's no rabbit. I think these are just decorative. And then at the Dance of Dragons prologue, it starts with, dogs were the easiest beasts to bond with. The wolf is part of you from that day on, and you're part of him. Both of you will change. Other beasts were best left alone, the hunter had declared. Cats were vain and cruel, always ready to turn on you. Elk and deer were prey. Wear their skins too long, and even the bravest man becomes a coward. So that's what happens here, is the guy turned into a rabbit, turned into a prey animal. And that's why he's so worked up and so scared, because he was almost attacked by a predator, a hawk, like we see at the wall that Melisandre is involved with when Stannis shows up and Orell's eagle is burned. I have more information on that if you want, but we won't cover it right now. So anyway, we're going down, and they're having lots of funny chats about this, and the paranoia and the fear is growing, and they're waiting on Sleazy Pete. Sleazy Pete still has not shown up yet, and when Sleazy Pete shows up, in combination with the rabbit and trying to pull a fast one and skin changing, we get lines like this. Think it's fun to turn me into a rabbit, huh? Milton said. Maybe I'll turn you into chopped meat and we'll see how fun that is, huh? And then we have this from A Dance with Dragons. The Queen of Rabbits must not be wed without her floppy ears. All those pearls will make me rattle when I walk. So there could be the pearls in this case for Dany could be the sign to readers that this is pulling a fast one via skin changing event. Drink. So there's more talk and more paranoia that's growing. He keeps making a few. He starts to talk about Volkswagens. He has a Volkswagen Rabbit. That's his car. All right. Anybody who knows me knows what a Volkswagen fan I am. So reading this for the first time and getting to VW, yes, of course, like I got goosebumps. I'm like, okay, I love this even more just from that small detail. But the more important part is that this VW that he got is a rabbit. And says, yeah. Milton said, frowning suspiciously. VW? Yeah, said Milton. There's lots of yes. Brand new, a rabbit. It gets real good. He stopped. Awareness dawned in him. His eyes. Hank laughed. Pete looked from one car to another. Oh, Jesus, he said, cradling his hands together. Where the hell is that thing now? We've got to keep it safe. There are all kinds of cougars and bobcats. Hell, they could kill somebody. What does he drive, Hank? Milton demanded. You know him, right? What kind of car has he got? So they're talking about cars now. You know, who has what type of car? I will link to it in this on this page and in this video, but I have a short thread from a few months back at this point where I've talked about how the actual physical being, not the power representation, but the actual physical being of dragons in A Song of Ice and Fire, they are vehicles. George also does this in Armageddon Rag with Daydream and in Dying of the Light and several other stories where the dragons we have in Song of Ice and Fire, they are cars eventually. They are vehicles. They are vessels, however you want to word it. And yeah, so when I say weird stuff like that might seem random, it's not. It's because I'm drawing directly from George's background. Because I try to avoid things like just making something up to suit my own personal theories or preferences in the story. Screw those. This is all about what is George trying to say. So yeah, dragons being vehicles, that is for Targaryens, that is a skin changing thing. But I mean, we all know that basic at this point. And then we get lines like, that was when Hank went cold all over. He dropped the bat. It clattered on the pavement and rolled. Then he pulled out his key, turned, and locked the door to his bar. Hey, Milton said, it ain't closing time. Oh, yes, it is, Hank replied. He pointed to where the sky was growing brighter and brighter. That isn't the moon. It's too overcast to see the moon. And anyhow, that's the wrong direction. But by then, none of them could mistake the glow for moonlight. It was swelling, visibly eating up half the sky, and its heart burned like the noonday sun, too bright to look upon. All right, if anybody's ever read Night Flyers, this same sort of thing happens in Night Flyers towards the end when they start to meet the Volcran, and the Volcran looks like some giant animal taking a bite out of the sky. I have that story transcribed and I have a video if you want to watch that one. Yeah, but I'll link to it if you want, and you can just jump to the point where it's talking about this giant thing looking like an animal taking a bite out of the sky, which I think is still a carryover from Norse mythology, which has a huge influence on George within various aspects of his work. And then I am not going to spoil the very ending of this, because again, I want you to read it. It's a short story. But this is when the wife comes home. And yeah, for for those that don't think that George would ever write a female as either the villain or the main antagonist in the end, I recommend stories like this. The Needlemen, Armageddon Rag, Bitter Blooms. Oh, there are several more I just can't quite think of at the moment. Because yeah, that's all in his arsenal of works. And then there we see some other carryover themes going into Quentin Martell. So it's, again, like Night Flyers, the Volcran, this is another analog for this big dragon element, this big animal dragon element that chews up the scene at the end. When Quentin goes, oh, also something from Night Flyers, we get a similar expression at the end. They're all like, a nova. So, and that's this big color changing explosion that they see at the end. George has said many times that Danny's dragons are nuclear weapons. We get a couple of like proto ideas for Night's King, Corpse Queen, the Corpse Queen. And yeah, a lot of these story elements. It's almost like when we're reading A Song of Ice and Fire and George is pulling from so many, that he's the old Nan in the story. And he's pulling from so many of his own previous works and knitting them together. The needles click, click, clicking together. And we readers are Bran in that case. And the more you read Martinworld, the more that you're going to love it as it comes up in A Song of Ice and Fire. I don't have any problem with it. I think it's actually quite interesting and exciting and engaging for nerdy people like me and others that overlap and read these stories. So yeah, I admittedly did a terrible job explaining the jokey style of this entire story. I call it a blague, which is a joke or like a piece of nonsense, but you please read the story. I'll link to it. You'll understand. It seems like one of these small throwaway stories that really don't have any consequences on Martinworld as a whole. Beg to differ. Nothing goes to waste in this story. Actually, I've said this many times over the years. I kind of prefer George's short stories because they have not just a beginning, middle, and end, but they're so compacted with such good information that it doesn't matter the length. And I think his strongest stories are some of the shorter ones, or definitely some of the shorter ones, which is why you can read a chapter in A Song of Ice and Fire and it makes total sense. It's like each chapter is its own story, beginning, middle, and end, and crammed with information. And I think that's George's previous 80 some stories that he has written has prepped him for his magnum opus. That's why we keep coming back again and again. So I started with a toast. Let's end with a toast. If you want to read this story and any of the other 20, almost 30 at this point, 20 some stories that I have transcribed and noted, for sure. Some of them also have videos if you prefer to listen. My blog page has them all on under the Reread tab. So this is what I'm reading from today, is Toasts and Other After Dinner Stories. This is a great little book. It's a really old one. So I leave everybody with this message, this toast. Here's to the future, whatever it brings, and hoping we'll never swerve from doing right and thinking right and getting what we deserve. Shalancha.